Okay, so Jerry, as the author of the acclaimed Emotional Roots of Chronic Illness, you explore the connection between subconscious patterns and chronic conditions. What led you in this direction?
Well, it's actually kind of a sequel. It is a sequel to my very first book, which was called Interpreting Chronic Illness. And at that time, I experienced people asking all the time, "What's the connection between homeopathy and acupuncture and conventional medicine? Can you figure that out?" And I was dissatisfied with how that was being dealt with in general in academic circles, even in the alternative medicine circle field. And I had given it some thought, and I figured out a way that, at least to my satisfaction, was a synthesis of the three methods. And so I put it together. I guess you can think of it sort of as a cosmology. But then I tackled individual chronic diseases that I knew about and deconstructed them in terms of the unifying ideas within Chinese medical theory, homeopathic theory, and how they appeared, pretty much minus the consciousness aspect, in conventional medicine. So I did that. Then there was a gap between that book and the other ones that I wrote, which became more and more homeopathic, until this recent one, where I realized, there's a piece missing here that would be really good to at least homeopaths to know. Using the number 5, I mean, there are 5, what do you call, elements in Chinese medicine, or they're also called phases. There are 5 senses, there are 5 seasons. In homeopathy, we have the 5 classical miasms, which are the inherited dispositions that all of us have from 5 diseases which have rampaged through the human population. And those miasms are how we look in homeopathy at chronic diseases. So I decided, that's something I left out. I've got to connect with those 5 miasms. So I researched that further, and there's lots of material about that in the homeopathic world, lots of history, lots of discussion. And I discovered, to my satisfaction at least, a profound existential question that is at the root of each of those 5 miasms. And that existential question represents the opposition, a certain quandary, an existential quandary. And so I went about pursuing that, and I found that I could organize homeopathic remedies in accordance with subcategories of those 5 existential questions, and fill that in with my own clinical experiences, explaining how that played out. The remedies that help diffuse the existential tension in those questions, and how that played out in a person's narrative, and how they got better from diseases. So
Jerry,
Jerry,
just because I don't think we want to assume all of our audience understands the difference between Western medicine and Eastern medicine. So can you kind of give a little bit of a clarity or synopsis of Chinese medicine, homeopathy, and biomedicine?
All right. That's been my life's work. It doesn't come immediately, but yeah, there's a few pithy things I can throw in there. I mean, very basically, conventional medicine has one enormous gap. It either doesn't recognize or it doesn't take into consideration the importance of consciousness, the mental side, the mental and the emotional side of stuff. You're basically looked at as a mechanical object. And not only that, you're like a car, you're broken up into various parts: internal medicine, dermatology, orthopedics. Nobody wants to put the whole thing together. And if you go to your doctor, and especially
it's
nowadays,
very segmented, right?
Yeah, it's very segmented. You've got you've got 5 minutes. Okay, tell me what's the story here. I've got to figure out what box to put you in, create a diagnosis, and then I'll give you something for that. And then next patient, come in. Homeopathy, that's not the case. In Chinese medicine, that's not the case. The whole person comes in automatically. And the consciousness matters a great deal. Let's go to acupuncture. If you have loose stools, the acupuncturist will automatically assume that you worry too much, that you're obsessing about something. Other way around too. If you're the worrying type, the acupuncturist who feels your pulse and looks at your tongue is going to be investigating your spleen to see if there's dampness there. It's hardwired. Completely hardwired. And each of the 5 elements are about that particular kind of hardwiring. All the systems and all the various types of aspects of Chinese medical theory represent that. In homeopathy, it's even more extreme. It's much more extreme because the remedies are so completely customized to the individual. Homeopathy is not diagnosis driven. the diagnosis is often a red herring. It's something that distracts you from what's actually going on. Yeah, it's convenient. The doctor wants to put you in that box and give you something for that. But if you come to a homeopath with a diagnosis, well, we'll write it down. But the same diagnosis with 10 different people will result in 10 different modes of treatment. At the same time, one remedy, a particular remedy, has such a large morphic field, like a scope of action, that it may treat people with various, a multitude of diagnoses. The paradigm difference is enormous, which is why it's been so hard to synthesize the two things in any kind of a integrated medical center. It simply cannot be done. And also in the conventional world, which is far more powerful than the alternative world, the presumption is that we're doing the real stuff. This is the real medicine. And yeah, your stuff is alternative. Homeopaths and acupuncturists don't consider themselves alternative at all. 300 million people around the world use homeopathy, and probably the same amount use acupuncture routinely. And they don't regard this as alternative, but primary.
And their history goes way farther back too, right?
Acupuncture history is like between 3,000 and 5,000 years old. Homeopathy, you can argue something, well, not quite so long, but it goes back to Paracelsus, the idea of using like to cure like, complete opposite from the conventional idea, which is oppositional, antipsychotics, antibiotics, antiviral agents, this kind of a clash. Homeopathy is like, boom, just touches your vital force and prompts a reaction that actually wants to happen, that is waiting to happen, but has been unable to happen. Homeopathy provides a permission slip to the subconscious to overcome something that it previously thought was too big to deal with. Homeopathy tricks the body into converting a chronic problem into something acute. Why is that good? Acute illnesses actually keep us well. They are detoxification experiences. Of course, we don't survive all of them, but by far the majority we do. And that means we're back in balance. Once we've identified a pathogen or an emotional insult, mobilized against it and fought it off. That's how we get back to homeostasis. And that's so different on so many levels from the conventional model. Can amplify that further and further. But
I think it's good to kind of have that kind of conversation, because from my experience with speaking with people, it's their ignorance that keeps them away from even attempting to look at that option, right? Because they're so conditioned to thinking and believing that the traditional North American medicine is the way to go, and it's the only like you said, they believe it more real and more effective than the other stuff, because there's not enough conversation around it, right? And like you said, it's the alternative. It's like, whoa.
but let's get to the roots of that. I mean, there's some very clear reason why this has happened. Homeopathic remedies are not patentable.
Yeah.
Right? So there's no you cannot make money from them. You can only in terms of the expertise that someone brings to picking one out. Whereas the pharmaceuticals, which are the product of petrochemical processing, well, those are patented. And John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie were very interested in making money from that, and they wanted to clear the field for their medicines, and so they could make maximal profit. That's how the Flexner report came out, and was devised in 1910. In the conventional world, the spin on that is that, whoa, that brought us into modernity. We got rid of all the dead wood and the metaphysics of the natural systems. But from our point of view, as in the herbal world, in the homeopathic world, that was a disaster, and it eliminated freedom of choice. And I was talking to Ross before the show about my earlier book, Sane Asylums, the success of homeopathy before psychiatry lost its mind, which reports when these enormous, powerful homeopathic utopian asylums dotted the landscape. They were not sects, they were not heresies, and people got fantastic homeopathic care there. It was very popular. That story is not being told, and it's been repressed by academia and everywhere that the pharmaceutical and medical industry can make their suppressive message heard. So you don't hear about it. It's not an accident. It's not that people are ignorant. They have been taught that they've been conditioned, as you said, that this is not only illegitimate, but it shouldn't be talked about. We don't want to talk about this.
Well, there's an irony with all this too, though, isn't there? That the pharmaceuticals, basically, their roots were in homeopathic medicine. the plants and the roots, which originally became pretty much the source material.
Well, earlier on, before 1910, for sure, there was a lot more overlap between the two systems. In fact, the early remedies were absolutely made from the same medicines that doctors were using, just more dilute versions of it. So I shouldn't assume people even know what I'm talking about here. Homeopathic remedies are dilute. They're very, very, very dilute. They're extremely energetic for that reason. And even though the FDA has designated them as drugs since at least 1938, they're only drugs, properly speaking, when they match you, when they fit you. So when someone like me spends a lot of time and decides, oh, this matches you, that means that if the substance that the remedy was made from in a gross amount was given to, say, 10 healthy individuals on a consistent basis, it would produce in them the same symptoms, mental and emotional and physical, that we're treating with a dilute amount. And that makes homeopathy different from herbs and makes it different from anything holistic. People misunderstand this all the time. And that misunderstanding has been inculcated by the pharmaceutical community by putting the homeopathics on the same shelves as other remedies. They're deliberately creating a confusion of that. Homeopathy is very, very different. But anyhow, in its sources, way back, when homeopaths were wealthy and eating the lunch of the conventional physicians, and they were using the same substances as the basis for their medicines, and they just had much more control over how dilute or how strong the medicines would be. So there was a lot of overlap. But the competition bred all kinds of funny things. There'd be allopaths, the conventional doctors, who would be using the homeopathic medicines, but not announcing it, not telling anybody. So they were being surreptitious homeopaths. And but the paradigm difference was that mainly economic. Nobody said that homeopathy didn't work in those days. They just didn't like having their lunch eaten. And the AMA was created specifically to ward off the economic competition. That was the reason the American Medical Association was created. They said everybody's going to the homeopaths, and we have this great education straight out of Germany. This is no good. We have to band together and fight this off. And the American Medical Association was created for that purpose.
Wow. And in recent times, recent few years, I'm seeing even kind of the same disinformation about, vitamins and just taking natural nutrients and such. You're seeing articles popping up here and there where they want to regulate them and get them under control, so to speak. Whether that's going to be by a prescription or just to kind of wipe them off the face of the planet, and just like they did with homeopathic medicine, to where it's just like, no, this pill, is your only answer.
Yeah. Well, we're not wiped off the planet, but we've been marginalized. We've been marginalized, and it produces disinformation is just so insidious. It's just amazing. Homeopathy, as I just said briefly, it has more official status than vitamins and herbs. It is officially, if you look at a homeopathic bottle, it has an identification number from the Food and Drug Administration. They were drugs, and that's because early on, the law of similars was completely accepted. It was not something that has to be proved over and over again. Like cures like, and you don't have to prove that each time. You don't have to put every remedy through a randomized controlled trial. It was absolutely accepted as a law of nature, because it's true, that a dilute amount of the same substance that is in a gross amount produces the symptoms can treat. Let me ask you something. The principle of getting back on the horse that threw you, does that need to be proven over and over and over again? Or would you not agree that that's kind of common sense? If someone has been terrified of a horse, they say, get right back on one again. Maybe not the same crazy horse that threw you, but a junior version of it. Otherwise, you'll imprint forever this terror of horses. And if you lived in the West or in cattle country, that might have been a death knell for your career. So anyway, that's the principle. And the idea of law of similars is absolutely ingrained in human nature, in nature. We have to face our demons from a spiritual point of view, and actually engaging with it, revisiting the scene of the crime, so to speak, under more favorable circumstances, which is what taking a homeopathic remedy is, or getting back on the horse that threw you. That is very beneficial to our health, and it's much better than avoiding it or taking some kind of drug to suppress your symptoms. What if someone said, oh, the horse threw you. Oh, poor you. You're so traumatized. Take this medicine now, so that you have less fear of horses. It would, it's not a great idea. What's that?
I said that's where the term "taking a horse pill" came from, maybe. Um, but I mean, it all makes sense. So explain how the subconscious mind works in the homeopathic system of healing. Because you talk about you describe that in your book. So where's the relationship between the subconscious mind and the physical manifestations of chronic illness?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time with that because there's no distinction whatsoever. As I say, in
Okay.
Chinese medicine, is kind of a hard wiring. In
Mhm.
homeopathy land, it's just so exactly one and the same.
Mhm.
If you talk to a homeopath and ask him or her to explain any remedy, absolutely the first thing they're going to tell. Well, they might for some remedies give you the physical symptom that's associated, but I can pick pretty much any remedy and tell you what the mental and the emotional picture is, and then I can go even further and talk about how that represents a problem at the subconscious level. By which I mean something very simple. Is something going on there that you're not consciously aware of all the time? I'll give some simple examples. Okay, a very basic remedy that people use is pulsatilla. Pulsatilla can be used for allergies. It can be used for hormonal disturbances, um, various kinds of digestive complaints. On the positive side, people who need pulsatilla, they crave comfort foods. Okay, that's not telling you very much. But what's really critical about that remedy is that when someone needs it, and it's primarily a woman, she cries at the drop of a hat. She cries at the drop of a hat. And if you say anything to her, or you ask her any question about whether she's ever been abandoned or been forsaken, she'll just gush tears like crazy. So this remedy is deeply about not just what's going on right there, not just about her asthma, about her allergies, not just about her stomach or her craving for comfort foods. It goes back to something probably established quite some time ago, where she felt some trauma around having been abandoned, which lodged itself in her subconscious. So they come into me and say, I've got a hormonal complaint, my periods are bad, and she's going to get more than she bargained for from the homeopath, who has to address the subconscious problem, the fear of being abandoned again, that hot button. And the remedy will do
Yeah,
that.
it's a good thing that the good topic I think to talk about, because
Right.
I'm a retired master hypnotherapist, and I've got certifications in neurolinguistic programming and other things. And one of the things that we learned in our NLP trainings was that we have this thing we call organ language. And organ language is the language that a person uses to metaphorize the what's going on for them. So the unconscious mind, in order to communicate what's going on, kind of formulates what's going on through their language unconsciously. So they'll say things like, I have a gut feeling that this is the right decision. So they're talking about their organ as if it's this thing. But when you do things like things like um, that just hurts my heart. Well, then the body is going to react that way. Or that person gets under my skin, and so now they got skin issues. So in the language, the unconscious mind is revealing this stuff. So there is this correlation with how the unconscious mind is experiencing things and how it communicates things and how it shows up as the reality that we have.
Yeah, we're
Mhm.
completely on the same page. I use idioms all the time. Idioms are an idea, a deep idea that has been entrenched in the subconscious, because it's true. And we say, for example, we go blind with rage. We don't say we go deaf
Yeah.
with rage. We don't lose our sense of smell with rage.
Yeah.
And in consequence of that, I'll do a little bit of my work here for you. In Chinese
Sure.
medicine, the sense of sight, right, is connected with the nervous system and with the element of wood and springtime and anger and the liver. All those things are part of the same um, metaphysical kind of category. So somebody who is rageful, absolutely rageful, and needs the remedy stramonium, for example. This is someone who's a hair trigger rage, and it comes completely out of nowhere. This is a person who's, well, the problem with sight is that you see too much. And when we see too much, That's the problem with sight. We get angry, and the trick is to convert our anger into creativity. Stramonium is a remedy for rage, where someone has seen into his own extermination. No one needs that remedy unless they've been terrified at some earlier time and felt that they've been abandoned in the wilderness. They can't see where they are, and they're absolutely terrified. And this is the situation of Vietnam War veterans, who come back and who have hair-triggered tempers and are just instantly fearful and rageful, because their rage represents a fear that they're going to be annihilated. And you have to know that sort of thing. But I can give many, many examples, and all through my writing, exactly what you said comes up. The heart. I take this to heart. There's some remedies.
Or wear my heart on my sleeve, or
wear my
or
heart
even,
on my sleeve, or
I feel the weight of the world on my shoulders, so now they got excess weight, or I got to get this weight lifted off my chest. And so there's this languaging that's tied in with the unconscious communication, right?
Yeah, I'll give you a great example. You want to talk about the heart? So there's a very famous suicide remedy. You ever read the papers and you say, oh, so-and-so committed suicide. How is that possible? He was the head of his class. He was valedictorian. He was the head of a company. He was unbelievably generous. He did everything for everybody. That guy, I think Bill Clinton had a friend like that who committed suicide. You always see that. You say, oh my God, how's that possible? Very easy to explain that homeopathically. I'll give you another example. J. Anthony Lucas, who wrote Common Ground, a very, very important book. If anyone wants to move to Boston, they should read that book. He won all kinds of awards for his writing. Then at the end of his career, he wrote a book called Big Trouble, which is a long, long book about a labor fight in Minnesota. And I think it pretty well exhausted him. Anyway, he was on the radio being interviewed, and the interviewer asked him a question that went to the premise of that book, and he couldn't quite answer it, and he went home and killed himself. The book, after he died, won all kinds of awards, but he was somebody who would have needed the remedy aurum, which is made from gold. So when people need gold, and here against with the language, people who need gold are as good as gold. They are like that. They live for God. They live for a very high purpose. They take everything on their shoulders, and they feel everything in their heart. These are heavy people who like to pray. These are people who are take endless responsibility on themselves. And of course, that's their go-to mode. And then it exhausts them. Okay, so they're exhausted. And then now what happens? They're in crisis. They go to their go-to mode, which is take more on themselves. That's a zero-sum game. And they're prone to have happen to them what happened to J. Anthony Lucas. But yet, remedy gold and the heart are very, very closely put together. And going back, I love these kind of things because they're so illuminating. If you read the Bible, I'm not a big Bible reader, but when Moses, the story of the golden calf, right? What happened there? Moses actually was acting as what we call a homeopathic prover. He didn't know this. He wouldn't have said this. But what he did was he saw that the Israelites were living for a low purpose. They were worshiping idols. They were not living at a high purpose. And he saw this golden calf, which was one of their idols, and he took it and he melted it down and he made them consume it. In doing that, he performed the homeopathic proving, because when they engaged with the essence of gold, aurum, they were forced to actually live for a higher purpose. This is, if we actually prove aurum as a remedy, this is what would happen. People, even if they're low purpose people, they just living for the day, they have no spiritual inclination. If they consume gold in a tiny amount, then the opposite of the law of similars would come to bear. This is homeopathic research. They would bit by bit become more responsible, probably better people, but also prone to the tremendous guilt that hits someone like that they're not doing their absolute best, that they're not living for God, and that would make them prone to having high blood pressure and things like that. So this idea of living, I take this to heart, very, very much at the heart of the remedy, homeopathic remedy aurum metallicum.
Wow, that's really interesting, because I've read about where mostly in Asia they sprinkle gold dust on their food.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in alchemy, if we go back to Chinese medicine and Qigong, early Chinese medicine had this idea of alchemy. They prize this idea. There's an idea in Chinese medicine that there's something called the cinnabar field, which is akin to gold, in the lower part of the abdomen, the dantian, right? And if you can activate that, you would not need to breathe, and you would be an immortal. So the early alchemists in Chinese medicine, they
Interesting.
experimented with ingesting all kinds of metals, trying to do that, to create the cinnabar field. Well, it didn't work so well. They probably diluted, used less and less of that amount as they did it, until they probably came to the conclusion was, none of this is any good. Taking these things in internally, we can do better. And so they did it with their mind. So in the Qigong exercises, we very typically, take energy and direct it while we have our tongue touching the roof of our mouth and imagining energy coming down. We consolidate that energy in the dantian, which is the cinnabar field. Now, nobody lives forever, but the Chinese idea of an immortal is somebody who postpones all his or her pathology to the very, very end and lives a maximally productive life. But anyway, so Qigong has its roots in this alchemy and the idea of ingesting a metal like gold to produce a spiritual transformation was at the core of that idea.
This is just so fascinating. So can you give us a few more examples? Maybe some case studies that you've actually put in your book that people can possibly relate to.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let me think. Well, I would say the most prototypical existential remedy I know is Thuja occidentalis. Thuja, Thuja, and that's made of arbor vitae, a tree of life. So when people need that remedy, be prepared. I could talk about this one for a long time. It's absolutely fascinating to me. They are inauthentic.
A little longer. We're not really bound to a time limit.
Okay.
So
okay. So inauthenticity is one of those French existential terms, right? If you read Jean-Paul Sartre, the inauthentic existence, inauthenticity. Thuja is completely about inauthenticity. When people need Thuja at the physical level, they generally have a lot of skin problems. They'll have warts. They'll have very dry skin. The scalp will be dry. They feel like something is moving in the intestines. It's a major asthma remedy. And by the way, in Chinese medicine, the skin and the lungs are one and the same thing. If you have a problem with your lungs, the acupuncture, you went to an acupuncture, probably use, well, if you have a skin problem, they'll use lung points, basically. And that's because Chinese medicine piggybacks on what we were like as a fetus, as a very young organism, where the exchange of gases takes place at the level of the cell skin. So skin and respiration are one and the same thing. Okay, but back to Thuja. So people who need that remedy, at the physical level, they can have all kinds of complaints. Now, they are chameleons. These are people who will fool you left and right because they have such terrible self-esteem. They have to hide that. And they will do anything other than be who they genuinely are. Absolutely anything. They are the embodiment of the Groucho Marx joke, I won't join a club that would have me as a member. And a lot of comedians are very self-deprecating. And they go up and tell you horrible things about themselves, but the payoff is that they get laughed at and they can kind of make a living for that. But they would, in conventional terms, they might be called many of these very, very depressed individuals. Anyway, where this starts, and this, unfortunately, this is a pretty deep problem. In childhood, if you've experienced terrible belittlement, being belittled and made fun of, or you got an early message that it was not okay to be yourself. If you were taught that love is conditional. We're told love should be unconditional. You're a child, everybody love, we love you no matter what you like. The opposite message can come true also, that you are not acceptable. And then the psyche will develop the strategy, my God, I'll be anything other than myself. So these are folks who need to blend in. They absolutely need to fit in. And you may not, and they can make fantastic hay out of that, but they'll have all kinds of illnesses, and they'll need the remedy like Thuja. I made up a little parable to explain this sort of thing, kind of a basic thing. Imagine two families, and the dad in both families takes his kid out into the backyard to play some baseball. So in the first example, the father lobs the baseball to the son. The kid swings and misses, and the dad says, that was a nice swing. You had an uncle who was in the minor leagues. Aren't we having fun here? The kid pops and hits a ground ball. Hey, you did better with that. You made some contact. This is going great. Aren't we having a great time? Kid finally pops up. Oh, this is an even better swing. Oh, let's keep going. This is just terrific. That's the first family. The second family, something different happens. Dad goes out in the backyard. The kid hits the line drive into the dad's mitt, and the father says, "Well, you couldn't get it over my head?" Lobs the ball to the kid again. He hits a ground ball. What are you trying to kill worms? Kid swings and misses. The dad says, "You suck. You stink. This is ridiculous. Forget it." Throws the bat down, goes inside. Okay, both these kids now enter the Little League a few years later. The first kid gets up and strikes out. How do you think he feels?
Tried.
Yeah.
He'll be okay. He's okay.
Yeah.
He's okay. He's got a self-found. No big deal. I struck out. That just brings me 1 minute back closer to the next home run. The second kid gets up and he knocks the ball over the fence.
Demolished.
How does he feel?
Like, I didn't get far enough.
He's a fraud. He feels he's a fraud. He's a phony.
Yeah.
You know,
Lucky.
the idea that of imposter syndrome.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's no way that he's going to ever overcome that. It just proves, not only does it not work, it proves that he's a fraud. This is terrible. I mean, it's an awful example, but unfortunately, I have to deal with this quite a bit. And that state of mind, which I liken to the bigger homeopathic question of where am I in time and space, reflects a complete inability to find your identity. Now, my question, I'm going to tie a lot of things together here for you. Where am I in time and space? In Chinese medicine, that is the dimension of metal. In terms of senses, that is the sense dimension of smell. In terms of homeopathy, that is called the psychotic miasm, which relates to gonorrhea. In organic form, back to organic language, that relates specifically to the lungs and the large intestine. Wow. And I've worked it out where I can explain to you how all those things are one and the same idea. And the quandary there is at the existential quandary is the opposition between centeredness and disorientation. And that's more easily explained in terms of smell. Disorientation relates to the sense to smell. You know, I found when I was doing my research on my first book that I knew the sense of smell can unify us through time. If you smell a certain cigar, instantly you're back to when you were a child and your uncle had a similar cigar. Dogs have this incredible sense of smell. It doesn't matter where it's coming from, whatever distance. Smell obliterates time and space. And I knew, I had an inkling that the sense of smell would have something to do with memory and reference. If we can't make a reference, we don't know where we are. So Alzheimer's disease, which is presaged much of the time by diminished sense of smell, falls into my category of this existential category, where am I in time and space? And Thuja, as a remedy, falls into the same category because it pertains to the skin, it pertains to the lungs, and people have completely lost their personal identity because they'll be anybody other than who they actually are. You see what I'm trying to do? This is kind of a cosmological work, and I do have a philosophical bias, but I like philosophy that has application, that has consequences. And I know this is how I can talk about that remedy, Thuja. It's the most amazing remedy because it comes up so shockingly when people cannot access their self-interest. They make terrible choices because their mind is overactive. You know, when someone is feeling normal, doesn't need a remedy like Thuja, they can ask their gut, is this good for me? Someone who needs Thuja is so distanced from his or her self-interest that that's the last thing they can do. So they cannot ask their gut, what's good for me? And instead, that's replaced by what I call mental gymnastics, obsessive thinking. They overthink things tremendously, and they draw really strange consequences. I'll give you another example, because I love talking about this remedy. They're fantastic examples. So a kid came into my office, a teenager. His parents brought him in. They said, what can you do anything for this kid? We're having a very hard time here. So what's the problem? He's convinced that he is a robot. Okay, he's convinced he's what are you talking about? No, and he talks kind of like a robot. He says, I'm a robot. Well, what happened to this kid was in biology class, they were teaching Darwinism. Now, this doesn't happen to every kid, obviously, but there has to be a fault line in somebody. In his case, just as I was talking about before, a history early on in life of having been belittled or humiliated or not being having been given conditional love. Well, anyway, what happened to him, and he's not stupid, In the biology class, they were teaching Darwinism, and that particular lesson was that adaptations within nature occur, which are completely outside of what your own personal choice. So the color of a bird might not have any choice as to what color it is, but the influences of the environment may cause the bird to have a certain color to camouflage itself, and so on and so forth, that these adaptations take place, and you have no control over it. And by the way, the Marxists went wild with this too when they created a Marxism from evolutionary theory, and trying to explain how class warfare was absolutely inevitable. We have no choice over it. It's not quite true, but that's how one of the arguments was. So this kid had been to numerous therapists. He'd been through all kinds of conditioning. Everybody trying to convince him he's not a robot. So I said to him, "Okay, well, listen, it's okay. This will work out. I've treated numerous robots before. This won't be a problem." And I gave the remedy Thuja. Now, remedy states are like the layers of an onion. You peel one away and something underneath it will come up. You do not become a generic person just because you've taken a good remedy. There's no such thing as a generic person. We all have our own histories. But what I found much of the time, and not every single time, is that the remedy of Thuja, the Thuja layer, which is inauthentic, right? You cannot access your self-interest. It doesn't serve this kid a whole lot of good to be a robot. It's not going to serve him well in life. It's insulating him from some kind of pain that his subconscious does not want him to experience at that time. So often after I give Thuja, I have to be ready that the next remedy that's going to come up will be a depression remedy, a depression state, something that will reflect the pain, the authentic pain that he's experiencing. And this is
because you're dealing with their identity, right? So once that identity gets altered, shifted, or taken away, you're like, well, there's an internal struggle of who am I, right? And then what comes up from that is more of their authentic truth. So that's
That's right. He now became in touch. Oh my God, I am this hurt individual. I'm in deep grief. And the remedy that often comes up in this particular remedy, a particular grief remedy called Natrum sulfurica, which has as its theme, I'm invisible. It's like I'm treated like I don't count for anything. I am just not even here. It's like Aurum, along with Aurum, it's another famous suicide remedy because the thinking is different. It says, gee, I'm hardly ever here. It's not like I'm not even here. Maybe I shouldn't even be here. Maybe who would care? I'll just hang myself. Of course, he didn't do that. And that's not always the case. But anyway, he did show up and he was no longer a robot. Hooray. And I was prepared and I gave him Natrum sulfurica. But this is everyday work in homeopathy. And we achieve these kind of changes in people within weeks that if they occurred in the context of psychoanalysis over a period of 4 years, you would be writing a journal article.
So let's talk about something that our audience can maybe relate to, some of the common things that we're seeing in society today. We have a huge surge in diabetes. We have a big surge in really bad
allergic reactions,
and arthritis is on the rise.
Okay, I'll take one of those. I could probably give a couple of hour talk on any of those things. I'll take allergies though, because just one comes to mind. And this is fun. This is going to be fun. Are you ready?
Yeah.
I remember years ago on Saturday Night Live, there was a character, Stuart Smalley, played by the disgraced.
Good enough, smart enough. Gosh darn it, people like me. Yeah.
Gosh darn it, people like me. He did something else I liked. He would say, I forget how it began, was I would put on slippers. It's easier to put on slippers than to carpet the world. You remember that one?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to apply that to this. So putting slippers on as opposed to carpeting the world. One of the medical professions I have a problem with is allergists, because if you follow that dictum, my God, so many people, and it's increasing. You can't have sugar, you can't have gluten, you can't have this. Don't go near that pollen. You're trying to carpet the world, basically. You can't live like that. Well, wouldn't it be easier if it turned out that the problem was that you weren't wearing slippers, that the problem was internal to yourself? So, not that this is true in every case, but here's one where it's primarily the case. If somebody comes to me and he says, Jerry, I've got this chronic cough, my throat is constantly, like something stuck in there, constantly clearing my throat. My eyes are bothering me and I get I get these circles under my eyes. My eyes are all puffy. But there's more. There's more. I have my stomach is upset. Okay, all that stuff. So I take the case and I suspect something, and I say, well, and taking the case, it turns out this person is rather judgmental. It turns to be rather a judgmental person.
Interesting.
And what are some examples of that? Oh, I mean, and it'll pick some kind of topic that's a hot button topic, abortion or the environment or something, and they have not necessarily incorrect opinions by anyone's lights, but they're very, very strong, very strongly opinionated about certain things, and they export this opinion very readily. If you talk about that topic, wham, it's going to come out. This is what's we call very simply black and white thinking, right? Black and white thinking, highly judgmental. People like that have a hard time with transitions, but on the positive side, they're traditionalists. They like things as they are. They like things as they are. They like their holidays. If they're children, they're the kind of kids who you can't transition from one activity to another. Hoarding or making collections is another big feature of that picture. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. I mean, hoarding is bad, but collecting, that means you want to kind of corner the market on some particular object. All those things belong together. That's a conservative strategy. They should all be together, and I should have them all. And there's no, you can't share that toy. What do you mean? It's my toy. What do you mean you're going to have it? Anyway, back to my person with a cough. I will establish in that case this judgmental person who thinks about things in black and white term. And by the way, I have a litmus test for that question, for that remedy. I'll say, do you ever hear in your head yourself saying, I can't believe you would think a thing like that. I can't believe you would do that. Who would think that particular movement is wrong? That who would possibly believe that you could kill a fetus? Who? Anyway, it's not the contents of it. It's the in your head saying, I can't believe such and such. This is highly judgmental. The remedy is potassium carbonate called kali carbonicum. Now, that will. Okay, well, that mindset is paralleled at the physiological level in the mucous membranes of the body. Why that is, don't ask me, it's above my pay grade, but it's true. The mucous membranes of the body, they like to be just a little bit moist, and they're all over the body. They're in the sinuses, they're in the gut, they're in the throat, they're everywhere. But they like to be at a regular level of moisture. And they are sensitive to gradients of input of moisture. When they're acting black and white, they don't notice that, and they become either too dry or too damp. It's exactly the same thing, the correlate of what's happening in the mental emotional sphere in terms of black and white thinking. And so that's why they have to constantly clear their throat. So the problem is they haven't instead of carpeting the world, they're not wearing their slippers. The problem is internal. So that's the remedy that you give, and it's very, very good for what would look like allergies from the outside. It would be something that you would apply to Crohn's disease, all kinds of anxiety felt in the gut, but just being a pain in the ass to people that you're close to because you're just so opinionated. And I don't, like with the robot kid, I don't engage with that. I say, hey, don't be a robot. It makes no sense. And I don't sell this person, you're too judgmental. Or I might say, well, that's what the remedy's about. You may find that when you graduate from it in 5 weeks, that you're more tolerant of in-between areas, gray areas. You're going to find that. Now, I'll tell you my best story about this remedy, is why I find this so funny, okay? I love this story.
Please.
So I don't know if you recall the election between Al Gore and George Bush. What year was that? 2000 something or other. So I had a client, and I don't even remember what he came to me for, but he was, I think he probably had asthma or something like that. He was a banker, and he came from a family where everyone was Republican, going back several generations. Moreover, he had some relatives who were Republican representatives. There was one governor of somebody, deeply, deeply Republican, completely ingrained in that family. So he arrived in my office the day after the election between Gore and Bush. And if you recall, Gore was an environmentalist and, had that movie, The Inconvenient Truth.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So anyway, my client's sitting there in the chair. He's looking at me. So what's going on, Gene? What's happening here? He said, what's the matter? He said, what'd you do to me? What did you do to me? What are you talking about? I voted Democratic. And I'd given him calicarbonicum previously. So in the liberation of that state, I mean, also his physical stuff got better too. We talked about that. The gray area that, something that was intolerable to him suddenly became a very amenable territory to him. And he couldn't abide the fact that he was, as a personal environmentalist, actually had this affinity, could no longer ignore it. And he broke all kinds of tradition in his family, and he voted Democratic. I've got lots of stories like that. I've got a few others.
That's awesome.
But that just illustrates the kind of changes that can take place. They're very funny. We homeopaths have, we keep track of these things. But
Right.
it's not like you come in here, fix my, give me something against my allergies, give me something to make the world more tolerable. The fact that he was saw things so black and white had either reflected or promoted this problem at the level of the mucous membranes and produced that problem. There's a good mind-body example.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's phenomenal. That really is. So let's break that down just a little bit though. So that particular treatment, what was the biological change that he had then? So what did that actually do? It released like are we saying it released a barrier, a subconscious barrier that he had?
See, this is, I know, I completely sympathize that you want to reduce it to something, cause,
Sure.
with some kind of reductionist thinking. And it's very difficult with holistic systems. I don't know. This is you're not going to get that. It's just something at the level of energy, quite frankly. Like, again, when someone overcomes the fear of horses, what are you going to talk about, a certain barrier there? It's very global. But we just know, and we can't go beyond a certain threshold. I just know from my experience that this remedy has a big impact on the mucous membranes of the body. There's another remedy which has an impact, for example, on the pleura of the lungs. And I have to recall what that remedy is. But people who need it feel alienated from society. So there are all these correspondences between the mind-body level and the body. And the Chinese always noted it. And Emanuel Swedenborg, the great Swedish mystic, also who is sort of the godfather of homeopathy, also noticed that these things, which is why Swedenborg was so honored by the homeopathic community and the transcendentalists in the late 1800s. So
Right.
if you just pay attention, you will see this. It's just we have been taught over and over again to distrust those things by the medical profession and modern thinking for the stupid reason that we make more money out of things when you're fearful, when you don't recognize them. But they're not so mysterious. It's advanced placement common sense. We've just lost the knack for paying attention to those things. But it's very global. Let's say thuja has an affinity for the skin pretty much everywhere, and the linings of the intestine. It just does, and that reflects the fact that our sense of identity is connected with that. Anyway, if you make more progress and you become a more effective practitioner, if you are willing to investigate think about things at that level, as opposed to constantly trying to find a single reduce it to one particular mechanism. It's
Right.
not as productive as at least clinically.
Because you're playing more of a holographic field, right? And so it's like,
Very
where
good.
do you
Yes,
pinpoint
yes.
that? Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
It's a holograph. You can call that a holograph.
I mean, the way my mind is looking at this is that you're giving the body something that it needed, and it corrected it something the body needed, and it corrected, or not corrected per se, it changed, it modified, and enhanced the thinking process.
Once again, this is a little bit reductionist, Ross, because you're looking at something like at the level of supplementation, something that it lacks, that doesn't have. It's really more like a quandary. It's much more like a quandary, some question that you have. If you wake up one morning, Ross, and you've got this burning, every morning, you wake up every morning with this burning question that's kind of at the core of your routine, of your life. You never got the answer to it. And I come up to you and I whisper the answer, it's something in your ear, and you instantly know that this is true, and it answers your question. Would you have to be told again? No. Would it matter if I shouted it or whispered it? It would not matter. It's something very global, and we are deeply affected by things like that. They're much more important to us the existential meaning of things than some mechanism. This is why people flunk their regimes all the time. Do you have any idea how many acupuncturists and homeopaths get clients who say, this naturopath, chiropractor gave me all these drugs, all these nutrients. It's so expensive, I can't afford it, and I guess I'm failing him. I just can't do it. Well, in fact, it's just not as good as a single little remedy that addresses the reason for why someone else would think you need those things. You can reduce it to something mechanistic. You can make the effect. You can make the argument. You will point out all the problems that are downstream of that and correct for them one by one. But it's not the same as addressing it at its.
You are so hardwired to know the lineage,
Right,
like this sequential thing, that it's hard for people to grasp that. And we talk about being in what we call the infinity thinking, where it's not a this or that, it's a this and that and that and that and that, because they're all included as a part of the picture. It's like when I was doing hypnotherapy, I was like, well, how do we know if this hypnosis session is the one that made the change? Maybe it was a variety of other things. Maybe it's something they did here and then they left the office and then something tricked. There's no way to know. Oh, and you said it earlier, is it's more like a and one of our teachers says is the individual themselves gives themselves their own permission slips for what's going to work.
Yeah, and it's very undramatic and unbelievable at the same time. So I mean, when you're getting well, or you never get sick in the first place, it doesn't seem that as dramatic as when you take a drug and you say, "Wow, I respect that drug. Maybe puke for 3 days. I got a headache for 2 days after that." Well, I'll tell you another story because it's just so funny, just a lot of fun. This goes way back to my early days when I was transitioning in the 1990s. I was transitioning my acupuncture clients to homeopathy, and I saw a woman came into my office. And she said, "Jerry, what can you do for me?" I said, "What's the matter?" I said, "All I want to do is work. I just work. I work 50 hours a week. I don't care about anything else. And I'm irritable and I'm impatient." I said, "Well, what about your family? What's family like?" "I don't care about them. I've got a sister in Israel. I don't even want to see her. I don't talk to anybody. Do you have any hobbies?" "No, I got no hobbies. I just want to work." "This is awful. This is terrible." So I gave her a remedy, Nux vomica, which is very kind of an obvious remedy to homeopaths, and at the low potency level, it's a common remedy used for hangovers, sometimes for food poisoning, but in homeopathy land, it's for someone like this. So anyway, a few weeks went by, and she was supposed to come in for a follow-up, and I get this phone call on my, at that time, answering machine on my phone. "Hi, I'm not coming in. I'm not coming in. I want to cancel my visit." So I called her up and I said, "Listen, Susan, I'm a new homeopath here. If I didn't give you the right remedy, tell me about what happened. I mean, I'll make a correction. I won't even charge you. What's going on?" So there's a big sign at the other end of the phone. She says, "I'm the same. I'm the same." I said, "Well, what's going on with you?" Not very much. I mean, I'm decided to take a vacation with my husband. Yeah, he had some time off, so did I. 3 months earlier. We're going to go visit my daughter in Israel. So I mean, nothing. What's the big deal? I said, "What did you say?" Yeah. Well, that's right. Okay, that's not the end of it. So my office was upstairs in this particular condo complex. Downstairs was a gigantic room where yoga was being taught. And I'd went to my office the next week, and I'm peek in there, and there she is doing yoga. She didn't need me. I mean, she just didn't notice. I mean, I don't think I've ever met anybody near as oblivious as her. But when you just get well in your own way, you will attribute it to all kinds of things. Yeah, my husband has some time. We'll take this. My sister, this is probably kind of time I should go visit my sister. Oh, that's not, maybe someone's been telling me about yoga for a long time. I guess I should try it. Every single thing I prescribed on changed unequivocally, and I didn't get a bit of credit, except I've got this great story to tell. And that's fairly typical of homeopathy, because when you get well, again, it's like a permission slip. You own it, you possess it. It's not like some miracle doctor came and waved a magic wand over you. It creates a state of grace wherein you can access your higher self. Maybe the sort of thing that can happen in hypnosis, I imagine. But it's just as wonderful and magical and also undramatic as all of that. And you can't reduce that. I don't see how you could possibly reduce that to anything. Now, Nux vomica is a nut, right? Phenomenologically, you can talk about it. People having a hard exterior, like nuts, and being kind of soft inside. And there's a hardness to them. They tend to get backaches. They tend to be very irritable. They're workaholics. And so taking that in some magical way, which is not so magical if you simply accept the idea of the law of similars, it undid that. It gave it a release from that delusion that all that matters was work. The expression I use to describe Nux Vomica is at war on the battle, desiring peace on the battlefield. So they say to themselves, they will say in your office, I just want some peace. If only could have some peace. Everything irritates me so much. And then you find out from their lifestyle that they're constantly on the battlefield. Every situation they turn into a battle, and just, and yet that's where they want peace. The counterintuitive thing would be to say, leave the battlefield, but they can't do that. That's why therapy fails. But if you give the remedy, which acts like a bomb deep in the subconscious, somehow it does this magical thing. We are designed to overcome our conflicts, provided that they are presented to us in a manageable form. So the remedy is a tiny, 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 tiny version of your problem. In a gross amount, if you consume this Nux Vomica over a period of time, you become like this poor woman. You become a workaholic. You become irritable, incredibly impatient. It does that. And then in a tiny, tiny, tiny amount, it provides that welcome relief.
That's fascinating. There's we spoke earlier about tinnitus and I had a good friend, his father had suffered really, really bad tinnitus. I mean, just literally brought him to his knees. And this is where we were talking about acupuncturists earlier. And I said, you should go see my acupuncturist. And so he went. He says, like, I don't know if I can convince him, but eventually he did convince his father. And he went, and I think he did I don't know, he was treated for like 5 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. And my friend comes back and says, hey, my dad never had a problem since. He goes, he feels great. And then about a couple weeks later, his father came in, and I said, hey, I said, Ryan tells me that, you're doing really well ever since you had your treatments. He goes, yeah, I'm feeling really good, but I don't really think it was my treatments that did it. I mean, I just went off on him. I'm like, you're 70 years old. You have been dealing with this for 30 years. You spent 5 weeks having these treatments, and now it's gone. And that's just a coincidence? Is that what you're telling me? And he just kind of looked at me, and I'm just like, I says, that is the biggest line of bull I've ever heard in my life. But we see it over and over and over again. And Barry has stories like that as well. It's like, I don't think
they get that all the time in hypnosis. Oh, I stopped smoking, but it wasn't hypnosis. I just decided to. Okay, good. As long as you stop, I don't care.
That's true.
So it is odd, because it goes back to what you had said earlier, is that people have been conditioned. This is like, I need to have that instant relief, or it has to be a pill, it has to be a shot, it has to be this. This is the only way that I can be helped, or I can be cured. And it's not. It's actually, those are actually your last resort options, if you want to put it that way. So these are fascinating stories. They really are. And so we're kind of running up on our time. So tell people how they can get a hold of you, website. Obviously, you have an assortment of books. And do you recommend that when someone starts reading you, that they start with a particular book? Because you're saying that Emotional Roots is a sequel.
So but it's very accessible. I've got a great editor, and it's very readable, and the reviews are that people are picking up on it. I've got maybe a minute. I want to tell you what the 5 core existential questions are. I'm not going to, but I explain how they connect all these different spheres of knowledge. But if you resolve the quandaries within these 5 core existential questions, you'll be in a pretty good place. You'll know you'll know the meaning of life. But they're not easy, and everyone is struggling with one of them. Usually, it's a function of what age you are too. So the first one is, am I alone in life, or do I act in synchrony with nature and with others? The second one is my presence in the world sustainable? The third one, and I related Thuja to this earlier, am I oriented in time and space? And that covers, let's say, lung problems, grief problems, because you're stuck in time. You can't get over some grief from the past. The fourth one is, and this is probably the deepest one, especially with regard to Chinese medicine, because it's all about the kidneys. And that's where a tinnitus problem might be rooted. Can the boundary between life and death be abided? Are we going to accept the fact that we're going to die and invest our energy in our legacy? Or are we so terrified of death that we, for example, just lose ourselves in momentary pursuits, sex and glamour and possessions? This is very superficial what I'm telling you, but I'm giving you the question. The last question is, will the insurrection of my birth prove fruitful? And sometimes we'll ask this at the end of our life. Was our life worthwhile? Each birth is an insurrection against the status quo. The world was going along perfectly well. Now you come along. You're going to have some impact on this world. And that's the end of your life, you're going to ask. Samuel Hahnemann, who founded homeopathy, has a magnificent memorial in Washington, D.C. You should go see it. It's the only one, I think, still the only memorial to a foreigner that's in Washington. And in Latin, on that memorial, he says, "My life was not in vain. I did not live in vain." And he, of course, mounted this incredible insurrection against conventional medicine, and very famously did so and produced homeopathy. So those are the 5 core existential questions. What I've done in this book, the emotional roots of chronic illness, I was going to come out backwards, Homeopathy for Existential Stress, which people can find at the website for that book. Just Google the title.
We'll drop that website in the comments for people to grab that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll see all the remedies that are organized with their themes as subcategories of those 5 questions. And it's not a book for people who don't really want to examine their life or think about anything. You have to have a little bit of a philosophical view of things. You know, you've got to be a little bit dissatisfied with getting quick fixes. You got to wonder about what this life is all about. A tiny bit, not a huge amount. It's an accessible book. But that's the one I give a try. If you want to find out why homeopathy is so on the outs, why when you start talking about it, your friends and family members, their eyes roll, then read my previous book, which is Sane Asylums, the success of homeopathy before psychiatry lost its mind. And you'll get a very good idea of how the kibosh was put on homeopathy, how that happened, especially in the area of mental health, because our mental health is probably the worst aspect of our healthcare system now. Psychiatry, in large measure, is fraudulent. There's no such thing as a chemical imbalance in the brain. It's a lie. And the drugs are making us sick. They're turning us into serial killers in some cases. We have the worst mental health statistics in the world. Read the books by Robert Whitaker, and you'll see that that's absolutely true. It's completely been documented. And that book will show you of how the country went down the wrong path with regard to treating mental health because of the need for a profit motive in prescribing pharmaceuticals. Correct. So that's Sane Asylums, the success of homeopathy before psychiatry lost its mind. Both are put out by Inner Traditions, and they're distributed by Simon & Schuster. And I recommend those books to people. I think they'll get a kick out of them and learn something.
That's
awesome.
Fantastic. Jerry,
so before we wrap up, I just, when Ross told me that he got you on as a guest, I'm like, oh, okay. It clicked for me like Kantor. I'm like, Kantor, I know the Kantor. And so I know Kantor refers to and I'm not sure if you even know this, but it refers to the inspiring and multifaceted singers who lead the Jewish congregation in song and prayer. So I'm like, oh, okay. So in essence, your authentic self is the inspirational conductor of health and wellness to the world.
Thank you very, very much. My father was Czech, and in the Czech language, it also means teacher.
Oh, perfect. Look at that synchronicity. That's awesome. I always look for synchronicities of things like that. So that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. What a pleasure it's been to be on the show with you folks. I very much appreciate it. And you're extraordinarily good interviewers. And let's see what comes of this.
We love doing this. We absolutely love it. We do. Yeah, we do it for our guests and our audience as well. But really, this is really about us.
I can tell.
We are just sponges, and we have the mindset of there's always more to learn, and there's always more to adapt to, and there's always more that we can integrate into the work that we already do. I mean, I can see the gears going in Gary's mind and my mind and things that you're saying. We have a new program that we're aiming on starting next year that is going to focus on PTSD. And I'm just listening to what you're saying. I'm like, that might come in real handy. So I'm going to send you an email about a lot of this in a day or so. Just to, maybe if you can point us in some different directions. I know that you were the president of let me double check here real quick. The Council of Homeopathic Certification.
I was not. I was a board member of that group. Yeah, that's the CHC is the gold standard for homeopathic certification. So
yeah, and they're just like 2 miles away from my house. So
no
maybe
kidding.
there's there that you can point me in the right direction. Maybe I can get them on the show, but I can kind of get some answers from them, kind of
Okay.
pick the brain a little bit.
Sure,
So
sure
I'll
thing.
send you all
Sure.
an email.
Okay. And please let me know when the program will air so I can
We will.
publicize it.
We absolutely will.
Absolutely.
Thank you so very much, Jerry. This has been
My
an
pleasure.
absolute pleasure. And when the next book comes out, you be sure to let us know.
I will do that.
For sure.
I promise.
All right.
Yeah.
It's our
Absolutely.
pleasure.
All righty.
Thank you very much, man.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.